Hello and welcome back, and today we're going to continue looking at NAS brands and how their graphical user interfaces and indeed the NAS operating system that they arrive with compares. We're going to continue looking at the Asustor NAS that we've got here, the Nimbustor 4, and we're going to be looking at ADM and how it compares with QNAP software, the QTS. Now, I've already compared a bunch of other brands and hopefully some of those other videos have gone up, but today I want to look at these two for several different reasons. One, because they both seem to be targeting the same kind of user. When we've talked about Synology being more targeted at Mac users and wanting things simple, or the TerraMaster operating system where they want to go for something a little bit more old school Windows, both Asustor and QNAP have got a very similar target user in mind. Someone that wants a NAS that does all the bells and whistles, but at the same time doesn't mind a little bit of technical, because both of them are aimed at IT users. Although they can be remarkably straightforward and user friendly, both of them arrive with some very unique configuration options. Now, before we get any further into the video, let's get the disclaimers out the way. I've said it in the other videos, but I'll say it again. First and foremost, you can probably hear a humming in the background. That's because to get all of these software videos done at the same time and to make the most of this content and get it all done out there as quickly as possible for you guys, I've got several NASs running at the same time. Right now it's remarkably hot here in the UK, so you can, trust me, I am dying right now with the amount of CO2 flying around in this room. But I've got that hum you can hear in the background is two NASs that are relatively close to this recording area, which is necessary for both the surveillance and HDMI content I'm going to be doing later today. So consequently, I do apologise for that noise, but I'll try and keep things as clear as possible. Secondly, the PC that I'm using right now to record this software is obviously using capture software to record this on screen. This, combined with the fact that we are running two versions of this OS on the screen here with their own graphical user interfaces, means that I've had to squeeze them into half a screen each. I could flick between them and full screen them like so, but by doing that, it's going to make it a lot harder to flick between them, and I think it will just be a lot easier to compare these software side by side on screen. Of course, I am using OBS, if you can see on screen there. Minimize that because we're not going to need that full screen. And if we look at on the screen here, we've got both of their client applications. So once again, because of the screen recording software and the layout you see on screen, don't judge the software too harshly if sometimes an app takes a few extra seconds to load, or that the screens here don't display as smartly as they might if it was full screens. Do blame that on the recording setup and not on the individual apps. But without further ado, let's get into today's video. Now, you can see the client applications here on screen. These are both available for Mac and Windows systems, as well as mobile applications too for iOS and Android. Asustor Control Center, or ACC, gives you the ability to not only scan your local area network and find multiple Asustor NASs in your local area network, but also create mapped network drives and remote network finding target storage for third-party applications to utilize. The same thing goes for QNAP. It's exactly the same thing, and both of them give you the ability to action updates as well as interact with the NAS without going into the NAS user interface. I will say that there are more options and configurations available on the QNAP platform that are just not available on the Asustor software. There's lots of options here, and you can see they've all been broken down. There's Wake on LAN, individual ones where you can boot straight into the software if you so choose, and just lots of little ones there. But from a technical stance, the QNAP one is certainly better, with multiple options that let you really change some of the back-end options of your NAS without going into it. But the Asustor software still comes pretty damn close. Now, both of them will give you the ability to create a mapped network drive. That, for those that aren't aware, a mapped network drive is an area of storage that's visible on your PC system, a shared folder, and this means this folder can then be accessed and configured and utilized by your host system as if it was local storage, or at least appear so. There are more detailed versions of this sort of thing known as iSCSI and LUN targets, but we won't talk about those too much right now. Needless to say, both softwares support this as well. Now, if we move out of that and we go back into the user interface of the NAS itself, we can have a look at them. Using this software, you can find the NAS on your local area network, and this is the user interface of, on the left here, the Asustor NAS, and on the right here, the QNAP NAS. Now, another point to highlight very early on is the fact that both of these NASs are using different hardware. The Nimbustor features a quad-core Intel J series CPU, the J4105, and 4GB of DDR4 memory. The NAS on the right is a very powerful rack mount NAS, and this one features, I believe, a Ryzen-based CPU. So comparing between them, we're not looking at hardware today. Today, what we want to focus on is predominantly the software. So again, we're not going to match performance against performance. Also, it's worth mentioning I've got a lot more apps installed and running simultaneously on the QNAP right now, because to show you some of these apps, it's just easier in the long run to have them loaded up in the background. But the user interface of both of these is remarkably similar. It is worth mentioning though that there are a few extra options readily available on the QNAP. Now, both of them have got the sort of admin control there at the top. Both of them give you lots of ways in which you can find your NAS, reboot your NAS, wake on LAN and more. Both of them have got a little notifications bar at the top. I've got some there. And both of them allow you to open up a configuration and dashboard. Now, in previous videos when I talked about ADM, one of the things I liked was this quick kind of widget bar you can open up to access a lot of these, the resource monitoring logs and information. And although there is a much more detailed version of this in the activity monitor, if I click here, people quite like having the ability to quick access some of that stuff on the side, which is still very, very handy. And for those that just want a quick, easy way to see what's hogging all the performance, it's all readily available here. However, the QNAP one, it has to be said, if you are of a technical mind, this is brilliant. Their version is far, far more technical. And if you are going to find this intimidating, then you may struggle going forward with a QNAP NAS. Now you can see a lot of RAMs being consumed there. That's because I have a lot of apps running at the same time. But it still manages to do that remarkably well. But again, we're not going to focus too much on the hardware there. Now, we've got lots of information there readily available, and likewise, QNAP has its own resource monitor readily available. And their resource monitor looks a lot like this. Get that booted up there on screen. Again, blame the capture card for that one. Once that gets open, again, a little bit more information there readily available. Lots of bars, lots of stuff we can work with all at the same time. And it's just letting us know that the memory utilization is too high. And a lot of that is my own fault because of me having those apps open in the background. As you can see, there's everything from memory utilization there on a bar, just, you know, with graphs running in real time. And you can set individual alerts and actually go down to storage resources too. So although both of them do have storage monitors and that quick access bar built in and readily available, let's be honest, the QNAP one does give us more information. But again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing will come down to you, the end user. Next, we can look at access control. And we can look at how we add users and generally how we interact with the NAS. If we go to the settings menu here, and we go to the control panel on the QNAP, we can see that both of them do list the way things are done in a slightly different way. Now, the settings bar on the Nimbustor is a little bit more like Android. You've got the drop-down list there, and you sort of go through it straight away. Whereas in the case of the QNAP, it's a lot more like Windows Task Manager. You can maximize those options, but it's all broken down there. The ability to add users, the ability to interact with storage and configure your network are all readily available. On top of that, the way the devices allow you to interact with individual users and the network in general on a security and safety level is very different. If we go to the network settings option here of the Asustor, first and foremost, you've got the general abilities to change the IP, the DNS settings, create a static or dynamic IP network, as well as seeing the traffic and how you want to configure the maximum upload and down on individual ports, as well as setting up proxy servers and more. If we move out of that, we can make our way into the access control area, and this gives us the ability to configure not only individual users and create new users and new groups, but also how the device interacts with certain client third-party software, as well as the app privileges and network app privileges of individual users and those apps themselves. In the case of the QNAP, we have a much more detailed arrangement. And again, I'm trying not to be too one-sided here, because it will depend a lot on individual users. But in the case of the QNAP, if you go to users and user groups, they are separate options. There is a few extra layers, but the level of control and configuration of adding users is far more detailed. And although both of them will allow you to upload pre-existing CSVs of users, there's a much better range of coverage on the QNAP, and with individual users having far greater kind of their own account systems, because every user, both on the Asustor and the QNAP, will let people log into the NAS with their own username, and the permissions can be adjusted accordingly. It's still a better range of choices and support on the QNAP. Moving forward, we can look at those options for the network, because again, like all the NAS devices, which I'll never understand, even though they have one user interface for the options, as soon as you click one, it goes to this side panel arc. From here, we can look at their network options, and the network options on a QNAP are far better. Now, they have got a dedicated app called Network and Virtual Switch, and with a greater coverage of virtual machines in a business environment, the virtual network and switch options are just fantastic. I've often commented on the software interface of the QNAP. They've got a far more graphical interface of all the individual network ports on the device that you're using. They've got a lovely family tree and hierarchy that dictates what individual network ports are doing and where. So if you've got containers and virtual machines and ISO images, it's all controllable from this standard user interface here, something that's not available on the Asustor. And again, if you're not going to use features and functionality like that, who cares? But if you do think you're going to use those things, you will see a lot of advantages in going for the QNAP in that way. Now let's move over to the installation of applications, because if you are going to be using a NAS's user interface more and more, you're going to want to know how to install, add and enjoy applications. In the case of the Asustor, head over to the App Central, and in the case of the QNAP, go to the App Center. We'll let them both boot up, and I'm sure will take its toll on the capture device. Now, unlike a lot of other comparisons where I've compared other brands with QNAP or with Asustor, this time, in terms of apps and app quantity, certainly, it's a much more of a level playing field, although there are more apps available on the QNAP. Technically, there are more apps available on the Asustor, because on the case of the Asustor, you've got a lot of the time the same app in multiple versions. So for example, in the case of the Amazon Prime app, it takes up like 9, 10, I think even slightly more than that in just that one app, and both of them have a dedicated HDMI application, Asustor Portal in the case of the Nimbustor, and HD Station or Hybrid Desk Station in the case of the QNAP. And I will be doing a complete HDMI comparison very soon indeed, so I'm going to hold off on that for now, because that in itself is already a very interesting subject, and too much so to fit here into the browser-based access. Same with the mobile phone apps. We're going to hold back on that kind of content right now. But in terms of the apps, there's just more enterprisey and configuration apps readily available on the QNAP. There are business apps from Asustor, but whereas in the past, when I've compared Synology and QNAP, I've always said that Synology invests more in their first-party apps than they do the third-party, whereas QNAP supplies a lot more information and compatibility with third-party apps and spends more on hardware. In the case of this scenario, QNAP have a lot more first-party apps compared to Asustor. Asustor's first-party apps, although they've got applications for cloud migration and stuff with containers and Linux Station, which is great, or Linux Center in the case of the Asustor, and in the case of the QNAP, you've got Linux Station and other Linux-based, or Ubuntu as well, which can be completely deployed via the HDMI port and as a remote network VM. These are things that just QNAP give a lot more first-party apps than Asustor, and still managed to do an enormous amount of coverage of third-party apps as well. And if that kind of tinkering and enjoying those little apps on the side of your home or business environment is something you're going to be into, then I think the QNAP is where you're going to see a lot more fruit for what you're doing. Also, when it comes to virtual machines and some of those other enterprise things that we discussed, it's worth mentioning that QNAP has their own dedicated QNAP virtual machine application known as Virtualization Station that even lets you download and install ready to go VMs from their app center. So if we open Virtualization Station, the app, because as I say, we're seeing a slight bit of sluggishness from the QNAP because I have so many apps running simultaneously. In the case of the Asustor, we do have a virtual machine app, but it is using VirtualBox, which although is a great application that runs a whole host of virtual machines, it's still a third-party app that VirtualBox runs a lot of homebrew VMs and VMs, even runs Mac VMs as well, which is fantastic, but there still isn't the coverage and the support that the virtual machine device on QNAP gives you. For example, with the QNAP you can install a graphics card. Let's open that up there so we can close that window. We can install a graphics card in a QNAP virtual machine, and from there you can then assign the values from that graphics card to the VM. The same with HDMI ports, the same with USB ports. You can link them and assign them all to your virtual machine, and you can still try Windows VMs at the click of a button. You just click there, say which version of Windows you want, and then you have 90 days to try out a VM. Just download it and deploys it straight away, which is what I'm doing here in the background for another video. Remember, during the course of this, so far, this video I've been doing all kinds of stuff with this QNAP during this comparison for future video, and it's managed to maintain that. There has been a pinch of lag, but it has been there. Doing all that stuff in the background. Now, with the Asustor application, once again, you have all of those abilities to do all of those things, but to a lesser degree. So if we go down to the bottom, we try to find VirtualBox, which we hope will be near the bottom, thanks to the fact it starts with V. Why don't we look it up? Find that there in the background, and it's worth mentioning again, one of the things that I highlight in other videos that's really good about the Asustor platform is all of the support of ROMs and ISOs, and all of those emulation areas are all supported. There's stuff like RetroArch, Medafin, SNES 9X, all of these arcade emulators which Asustor have on here, which are really, really good, are all available on the QNAP as well. So there's no inherent advantage this time, as I've said in the other videos. And with VirtualBox, again, great application. You can use it to, get a VM up and running. It runs in a separate tab there. It's PHP based, of course. And if we get into it, oh no, we are going to have to set up one. We'll save that for another video, VirtualBox. I think there is a whole dedicated video in NAS Software in that. Let's minimize that, put that back there. But again, the fact that they're using a third-party app and QNAP have a first-party app is definitely worth noting. The same with surveillance. Both applications, and again, I've got a whole dedicated video down here just on surveillance, but both of them arrive with a client application, such as what you can see me there on screen while I'm talking. This is the Asustor application. I'm just going to wave at the camera there. I think there's a slight delay there in the background of about 30 seconds to a minute. Eventually when I wave, you'll know how long that is. On top of that, you've got QNAP's own one, QVR Pro. And QVR Pro there, I've got one webcam to the left that's running, and if I wave at that camera, that's running straight through there, whereas the other camera I'm now sharing between several different NASes. And at the moment, I think that's causing a bit of a confliction. But we will be covering the surveillance applications for both these platforms very soon indeed. But what I will say is, if you try to load the application in Asustor for surveillance, it will start to open a new tab because it needs you to use just the client. So it'll close that tab, and then the client opens here at the bottom, which means that to take advantage of the surveillance platform, and although there is a mobile application available, it will largely rely on a client device, whereas QVR Pro can be run mostly from the browser. There's a few things it can't do in the browser, like camera manipulation, but a lot of the features can be done in the browser. And likewise, when I do the surveillance video, it is going to be interesting to see how the Asustor Surveillance App Surveillance Center compares with Synology's Surveillance Station Application 2. So like I say, I'm not going to focus too much on surveillance, but I do know that with surveillance on the QNAP, you have a whole dedicated user interface, its own desktop graphical user interface that works, which again is something a lot of you guys are going to like. So again, QTS there on the left when it wants to load, and QVR Pro. That card is really getting hammered by today's video. Shut that up there, shut that down. Now, what about enjoying your media? What about how you're going to enjoy your photos and stuff? Well, a number of you are probably going to use Plex, and both of these software platforms do support Plex Media Server very well. They've both got the dedicated app. You can see right now the system's telling me that my utilization is too high on the QNAP. What I'm pleased to say is what you can do is use a little QBot and it will optimize and empty and flush the cache. Something for those that had early Android phones with Advanced Task Killer or just Task Manager on a Windows machine will see the advantage of. Now, enjoying the media, both of these devices have dedicated applications to do that. No doubt when I open these next 7 or 8 apps, things are going to slow down. But what I'm going to do is get them all opened up, and we'll go through how to enjoy photos, music and video on both of these apps via the web browser. And remember, there are mobile apps for both of them. Now, the way that both of these companies have approached the ability to browse your photos via the web browser is very, very different indeed. I say photos, we are going to look at music, photos and video. Once again, both of them support Plex Media Server, and of course both of them can be used for iTunes servers, DLNA media servers, and basically a multitude of ways in which your media could be streamed to third-party devices such as sound systems, Bose sound systems, TVs, consoles, basically all the devices in your home or business environment. But before we go any further, I think it is worth mentioning that QNAP does have one relatively new tool to add to their arsenal, which really surprises me that no other NAS brand has gone down this road, namely Multimedia Console. Although still in beta, so it's not really fair to say this is a full reason to buy one of these devices right now. It is a complete control panel for all media on your NAS device. It's a one-port access point for you to select where you want different applications to source and index media from, rather than going into all the individual apps and selecting which folders they select from for their smart albums. On top of that, indexing can be done as a schedule, as well as being assigned a different priority level based on individual apps. Things like thumbnail generation and transcoding can also be scheduled or given priority listings, and can be made sure to be done so they don't impact system performance overall. Lastly, the Multimedia App Suite gives you the ability to customize boot up, boot downs and general running settings on all media related applications, of which there are many on the QNAP NAS platform. And with AI engines such as the QNAP Core, object recognition, facial recognition and more being added to more and more applications in the QNAP system, I felt it would be remiss not to highlight Multimedia Console, although again still in beta. But moving away from that, we can look at how these two devices let you access media on your web browser interface. Try out the apps, and I'm going to be doing a full review of all of those apps again. It's been well over a year since I've seen them, and they've all had many, many updates since then. First, let's look at music. In the case of the Asustor, you have this Sounds Good application. You can look at thumbnails there, you can browse music, you can create playlists. At the bottom of the screen, there's the ability to play media files very, very easily and fluidly. Create playlists, choose devices that you want to stream media to, and it might be slightly off screen there, and the ability to choose whether you want the music to be outputted locally or via the HDMI output. It's worth mentioning both of these NAS providers have NASs in their ranges. They've got audio out. QNAP does have some stereo-based NASs as well as NASs with speakers, but nevertheless both of them allow you to output media directly from the device. In the case of the QNAP, you've got Music Station, and Music Station for there is their dedicated music app to enjoy your music via the web browser. You have two options: Spotlight mode, which is the one where it will sequence all the music from the indexing done with the likes of Multimedia Console, or Manage is more of a file folder system, a little bit more colourful and a lot more options with regards to playback. You've got that play section on the bottom, just like you have on the Asustor NAS, as well as the ability to choose which devices you're going to cast or play out from, but you will need the multimedia streaming add-on to do it. It's not available by default. So again, a few extra steps there during the initial setup, but it's definitely prettier overall than the Asustor, with also the ability for it to use metadata scraping to get album art. An option that is not readily available on the Asustor. You can download a lot of the art manually, or use the art that's already assigned to the metadata on some of these files, but for the most part you will have to do it all manually and yourself, whereas the QNAP gives lots of automated ways to do that. And again, maybe you're not going to enjoy your NAS media music in this way via the web browser, so again, might not be a deal breaker for you. Moving forward, let's have a look at photos. Now, photos is going to be another area of contention, just as it was for the Synology application when we compared Synology's DSM platform with the Asustor ADM software. I'm going to have to full screen that briefly to get rid of that pop-up. Close that down, close that. And we can look at the PhotoStation application. Now again, most of you might not be browsing your photos or media on a web browser interface. There you go, Multimedia Console still scanning. In the case of the Asustor, you can create smart albums, and we've still got the photos that we've been using in previous videos, all readily available on the device. Lots of night outs there. There may have been alcohol. Newsflash, I like a drink. But these photos, once you go into them, let's have a look at this picture of Jason here. He's a colleague of mine. We open that, so that's a different photo there. I've double clicked too quick. We can get everything from the locational data to get Google Maps stuff to tell us more about where the photo was taken, what the device that was taken on, and lots of information there about it. Lots of stuff there that's readily available with those photos, as well as you can manually assign tags. You can create different albums, and it's all browsable and all lovely and pretty there. Now, if we go back to those main albums and we go back to the QNAP again, much like the music app, has got a smart gallery there, and it will sequence both photos and video and create those smart lists. And now let's go for that photo there. Let's have a quick look at that one. And again, we are going to see options now that aren't readily available on the Asustor. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it's the sort of stuff that you guys want to know. If you're using a 360 mode, you can enable this to be visible on VR, because QNAP supports VR interfaces via the network and locally. Likewise, if you enable face tagging with the AI recognition that we're going to talk about in a bit, it will be present here. The ability to share and download files, or you can look at more ready information about the files and folders, and again, all the information that was there from the previous is readily available. Everything from the type of device that was used, the f-stop, the photography, the locational data, and more. And you can add more ready information. In fact, you can create the map user interface of your photo gallery that will allow you to see all of your photos as a map interface rather than as individual photos, which I know will appeal to a number of you out there. So if we scroll to the top and we go to the Manage section, and this way we can look at it on a more of a file folder interface. And again, it's that issue whereby you can see that QNAP have really gone the extra mile with regards to design on what they're doing and how it's displayed. And Asustor, although they've created an interface that is most certainly functional, it doesn't compete on a visual level, which I know will annoy some people, but not all people, because again, it will of course depend on how you plan on using your device. Now, Staying on the subject, before we move over to videos, again, it would be very remiss to not mention QNAP, another beta app, which again, I know it's not fair to talk about betas really, but given this video might be seen in 6 to 12 months time, these things could be out of beta and in full release soon enough. If you don't want to check out the betas for Asustor, they have a whole section for betas on their app store. They don't have as many at the moment, and they are working on their apps all the time. But if you ever want to check out the betas, you can scroll down and look at the beta app section for some of the betas that are readily available for Asustor, and these betas are first and third party applications too. But the reason I want to talk about that particular beta application from the QNAP is because this is the one that has both facial recognition and item recognition. So, for example, in here I've already named some people. This gives us the ability to recognise faces that are in a lot of our photos, and then these faces, once you add more photos later, whether you upload the last decade of thousands of photos you own or add another 1,000 today, once it starts learning who people are when you tell them, such as this being a friend of mine called Morgan, we add him, and of course Morgan in this photo has a card in front of his face, so if we say who is this, we can find Morgan there and we can merge it, and that means going forward photos of Morgan will now be recognised, and I won't have to do this again for him unless he looks drastically different. But what's real interesting, because obviously you can use this to find users by their name and also club names together, but you can look at my other personal item favourite things. This is the ability to look at subjects. So if you want, these are ones where the photo had like the username, the file name img19372, whereas this actually identifies what's in the photo. So you can search by a concept. So you can search for a concept like food, and it will search through your files and find, and maybe I went, if anything, that didn't go right, did it? You can look at individual foods rather than just the word food. So you can look at alcohol, for example, and photos of alcohol. It's smart enough to know the difference between them. And once you apply those tags and officially create those tags, then they will appear in that search area. So moving away from photos, let's go to the last area, which is videos. With videos, we can look at how both of these brands deal with videos. Now, the user interface for videos on the Asustor, unlike photos and music, is actually really quite graphical. You've got these individual tabs. You create folders for home movies, for TV shows, and for box sets and stuff like that. On top of that, create favourite lists, playlists, notification lists, and more. Over here we can see lots of the files that I've been creating recently that are backing up to the NAS, and if we go for some of these other ones, such as we've got some retro old stuff or some TV shows, we can look at stuff like this album here for the thick of it, and again, lots of this information you have to enter manually, which isn't great, and there are options out there and plugins for scraping metadata, but they are by no means intuitive. They are ones that you kind of have to do everything manually in a way that might not seem as fluid as you might like. You can definitely watch all these videos as well as browse on a folder level, and of course if you install the HDMI application, Asustor Portal, you can enjoy all this media via HDMI. Sorry, got a bit of a cough there. In the case of the QNAP, again, it's just that bit more graphical. You have to maximize the screen there just to get rid of this notification. One more cough coming. And the way it deals with video files, we're not going to worry too much about all the add-ons there because we've not installed them all. There is the 360 view support. There is transcoding. You've got all this information about the files that are on the NAS. We can create those individual folders, which I have not done a lot of that of at the moment because I've not set them up in the Media Console app. But the point is we don't need to, because we can go on a file folder level just like that one, and from here we can find out a lot of information about these files and folders. We're also able to scrape metadata in a way that you can't using the Asustor application, as well as a lot of choice with regard to the apps we can play these files with at the beginning. You can change the default playback on this, on the Asustor, but unless you change it to one of the apps that you've installed, say for this one, this is a video we've been playing for other videos, carry on, and it will use the AS player in a brand new app. You can choose whether to transcode at the beginning, and with this you can select what you want to play back with on that QNAP. And again, it's working lovely and nippy here on the Asustor. There's been no doubt in my mind of how quick and easy that application is. But for those that want a little bit more control, or using client applications on your PC to play the file through directly, those are options that the QNAP gives you. And again, maybe you're not going to use all of these options. Maybe you just want to use Plex, and Plex runs damn well on both of these devices, and all that scraping of metadata readily available. So if you are thinking about how your third-party apps are going to be using these devices, definitely that will change the outcome of this for you. But on a customization level, the way your data is handled, everything from the storage management on the QNAP is just beautifully presented by comparison. And for a number of you out there, and again, I really probably shouldn't have ran all these applications, but I've made sure to have all the apps for this video running in the background so it's quicker for you guys. There's just more options readily available to users. Sorry, I've selected the wrong option there. There's more options readily available to you as a connected user on your web browser on the QNAP system. Like right there, the snapshot manager being slightly separate. And if we go into the storage manager, which my brain isn't working, it's there, we can see that, don't get me wrong, if you don't want a technical interface, this is very, very good on Asustor. It makes it very unintimidating, and all the options are readily available there, but they're nowhere near as deep and nowhere near as bespoke as they are on the QNAP. And if you are a user, a prosumer, a small business user, or someone that already has a little bit of knowledge about IT or networking, you are going to love the options that QNAP give you there. If you're not going to use them, then you might think it's all a bit of a waste. Maybe you're only using it as general backups and file storage, and this really isn't going to appeal to you. It's worth mentioning, of course, once again, about the Linux support. The fact that QNAP has got the malware remover, antivirus trials and more, and these same things are exactly available on the Asustor NAS as well. I'm getting sick of having to click this little guy because of all the RAM I'm using up right now. But with all of the apps that are available, I mean, look at this. Of course, this thing has had to get me to use the resource clearance tool, because look at the number of apps that I've got not only installed, but most of these apps are running right now, so I could access them in the course of the video. Look at the sheer scale of storage options available. Even my media support, which allows you to connect your QNAP and your Amazon Alexa, things that just aren't available on the Asustor. The Asustor is a great platform, and for the hardware you're getting for your money, it is phenomenal. But it would be it would be a lie to say it can do as much as the QNAP right now. And if that's the decision, if that's key to you about accessing your NAS via a web browser, then I think that decision's made for you. Now, we are going to be doing dedicated videos on the surveillance applications as well as the HDMI applications from both of these devices, and I look forward to showing you. But otherwise, this has been Asustor's ADM 3.4 software versus QNAP's QTS platform. Thank you so much for watching. I know it was a long one, but trust me, I'd like to think it was worth it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to wrap things up here. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and check out my other videos. Cheerio.